Millionaire Robert Sterling thought kids were for other people. Then his maid turned his world upside down with twins. But before we spill all the tea, drop a comment telling us where you're tuning in from. Ready? Let's dive into this wild ride. Robert Sterling had it all: a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a fleet of cars that cost more than some houses, and a bank account that seemed to laugh at gravity. But inside his sleek, modern fortress, silence echoed louder than any city siren. At 38, Robert was a titan of industry, but the trophies on his shelves couldn't mask the shadow he carried. He couldn't have children. It was a secret shame, a weight he dragged through every day. Family dinners were a minefield of pitying glances and backhanded jokes about his barren branch on the family tree. In his world, a man's worth was measured by his lineage, and Robert felt like he was perpetually failing the test. One morning, the relentless hum of his anxiety pushed him out the door and onto the deserted streets of Brooklyn. He needed to escape, even for a few hours, the gilded cage he'd built. He pulled up outside a small, unassuming cafe, a place he'd probably walked past 100 times without noticing. Something about it drew him in. He needed a break from the suffocating perfection of his life. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of coffee and something vaguely sweet. It was worlds away from the sterile luxury he was used to. Behind the counter, a woman with tired eyes but a smile that could melt ice carried trays with practiced ease. Her name tag read Emily Johnson, just Emily. A waitress, probably a single mom, hustling to make ends meet in a city that never slept. When she approached his table, Robert, used to commanding boardrooms and bending the world to his will, instinctively tried to take charge. But Emily, unlike the polished yes-men in his orbit, didn't flinch. With a gentle firmness, she corrected his mumbled order, her words slicing through the carefully constructed armor of his arrogance. Something in that brief exchange resonated deep within him. Emily's directness, her simple gaze, it was like a mirror reflecting the flaws and vulnerabilities he tried so hard to bury. But there was something else too, a quiet strength, an honesty he hadn't encountered in the carefully curated circles he moved in. Back in his car, the familiar ache of loneliness settled in, but this time it was laced with a new emotion: curiosity. Emily had challenged him in a way no one else had dared, and for some reason he wanted to know more. An idea began to form, audacious and unexpected. What if she held the key to unlocking something new in his life? Determined, he hatched a plan. He would hire her to work at his penthouse, pretending he needed help with organization, with managing the sprawling space. But his real motive was to get closer to the woman who, in a few short minutes, had made him question everything he thought he knew about himself, about life, about the emptiness that had become his constant companion. The next afternoon, Emily was wiping down the last table at the cafe when Robert walked in again. He seemed different today, less rushed, almost thoughtful. As he approached the counter, Emily felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Curiosity? Maybe even a hint of anticipation. "Can we talk for a moment?" Robert asked, his voice controlled, but with an undercurrent of something softer than she remembered. "Sure," Emily replied hesitantly, drying her hands on her apron before sitting across from him. Robert paused, as if choosing his words with unusual care. "I'd like to offer you a job opportunity." He saw her eyes widen slightly. "I know this might sound strange, but I'd like you to consider working at my home. I need someone with your dedication, your skills." Emily blinked, completely taken aback. "Work at your home? I don't know. I barely know you. What would I even do?" "I understand it's an unusual request," he continued, leaning in slightly. "But I believe it could benefit both of us. And of course, the pay would be significantly higher than what you make here." He saw her glance around the modest cafe. "The truth is, I need someone to help my housekeeper manage the penthouse. It's a lot." She thought about his words, weighing her desperate need to provide a better life for her son against the unsettling feeling of stepping into the unknown. Finally, she nodded slowly, a nervous flutter in her stomach betraying her outward calm. "All right, I'll take the offer. But I hope you know I don't have any experience managing a penthouse. I'll do my best." Robert seemed genuinely relieved, a small, almost shy smile touching his lips. "I believe in you, Emily. Thank you for trusting me." With the agreement made, they both stood. Emily felt a mix of emotions swirling within her: relief, apprehension, and a spark of something else, something she couldn't quite define, but that felt strangely like hope. The next day, Emily's palms were damp with nervous sweat as she rode the subway uptown towards Robert Sterling's penthouse. The unexpected job offer felt like a lifeline, a chance to pull herself and her 5-year-old son Lucas out of the constant struggle. She didn't know the man who had hired her, but the money he'd promised could change everything. As she stepped out of the elevator and into the opulent foyer, Emily felt dwarfed by the sheer scale of the place. Taking a deep breath, she thought of Lucas, remembering the way his face lit up when she read him bedtime stories. This job was for him. That thought gave her strength. Inside, she was greeted by Claire Davis, the longtime housekeeper. Claire sized Emily up with an expression that was a cocktail of suspicion and disdain. "You must be the new helper," Claire said, the word dripping with condescension. Her tone instantly made Emily feel like an intruder. "Yes, I'm Emily," she replied, offering a hesitant smile. "I'm here to help wherever I'm needed." Claire's stern demeanor didn't waver. "Well, young lady, we have strict rules here. I hope you won't disrupt how this household operates." Emily's eyes flashed with quiet determination. "I'll do my best." From his office, perched high above the city, Robert watched the interaction through a slightly ajar door. He was intensely curious about Emily, even more so after their brief encounters at the cafe. Seeing her now, standing her ground with quiet dignity in the face of Claire's frosty reception, only deepened his fascination. He decided to maintain his distance, to observe. He didn't want her to see past the carefully constructed walls he'd built around himself. He knew his own heart was a tangled mess of insecurities, vulnerabilities he preferred to keep hidden. In Emily, he saw a reflection of himself, someone strong on the outside, but possibly fragile within. It was a connection he hadn't anticipated. Over the following days, Emily proved her dedication. She worked tirelessly, cleaning every corner of the vast penthouse, even under Claire's ever-watchful critical eye, which seemed to find fault in everything she did. Sensing a silent connection forming between Emily and Robert, Claire began to subtly poison the atmosphere, spreading malicious gossip about Emily amongst the staff and, more dangerously, to Robert himself. Despite the undercurrent of tension, Emily found small moments of respite. One afternoon, while working in the sun-drenched living room, she noticed Robert watching her from across the room. He offered a slight nod, a gesture so subtle yet warm enough to lift her weary spirits. In those quiet moments, Robert began to entertain an unexpected fantasy. The idea of marriage, of a life shared, flickered in his mind like a fragile flame. He couldn't fully explain it, but there was something about Emily, her resilience, her quiet strength, that stirred a sense of protectiveness, of renewal within him. He caught himself imagining what it would be like to share his life with someone who understood struggle, who wasn't intimidated by his wealth, who saw him, perhaps, for who he truly was. Still, these were just vague daydreams, far from concrete plans. And then there was Claire to consider, a woman he knew harbored feelings for him, whose manipulative presence cast a long shadow over everything. Yet, his mind continued to weave a strange, improbable future, one where Emily could stand by his side, not as his maid, but as his wife. Emily, meanwhile, was beginning to realize that her job here was about more than just dusting furniture and running errands. Claire's constant, shadowy presence made everything feel charged, uneasy. Her instincts screamed at her to be cautious, to keep her guard up. Outside, the New York night glittered, but within the walls of Robert Sterling's penthouse, the atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive. After a long day, Emily sat at the kitchen island, her stomach knotted with tension. Claire's cold stares followed her like phantom limbs, amplifying her unease. Suddenly, Robert entered, his expression unreadable. He sat down opposite her, his gaze fixed on her. The silence stretched, making Emily's heart pound. "So," Robert finally broke the silence, trying to sound casual, but his tone was strained. "How was your day, Emily?" "Hard, as usual," Emily replied, striving to keep her voice even. "The penthouse is huge, there's always something to do." The rest of the meal passed in strained silence, the clinking of silverware against plates echoing unnaturally loud. When they finished, Robert dismissed the other staff, including a visibly displeased Claire. Emily was left alone with her employer, feeling the weight of unspoken expectations hanging in the air. "Emily," Robert began, his nervousness palpable. "There's something important I need to discuss with you." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "Yes?" she replied, her heart hammering against her ribs. Robert took a deep breath. "What I'm about to say might seem unexpected, but I want you to really think it through before making any decisions." Emily frowned, her mind racing, filling with unsettling possibilities. "What is this about, Robert?" He leaned forward, his gaze steady, intense. I want to propose a marriage of convenience. The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. A marriage of convenience. With him. Yes, he confirmed quickly. It would silence my family's criticism. They've been pressuring me to settle down, to have a traditional family, to prove I'm capable of leading a normal life. And, he added, almost as an afterthought, you'd be an ideal mother figure for my son. He seemed utterly unaware of the devastating impact those words had. Shocked, Emily stood abruptly, pushing her chair back with a loud scrape. How can you be so cold? She stammered, her voice trembling. Marrying me just to solve your problems? I'm not some object you can use to pacify your family. This is completely inhumane. Robert held his posture, though a flicker of pain crossed his face. I understand it sounds insensitive, but think about your son, Emily, Lucas. We could both benefit from this arrangement. I can offer you security, a stable home, and you think that's enough? Emily exclaimed, her voice rising, echoing in the vast kitchen. Material things can't fill the void, Robert. I refuse to be part of this. I won't be a trophy on your shelf. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Robert closed his eyes for a moment, reflecting on the raw intensity of her reaction. He realized, with a jolt of shame, that his carefully constructed proposal, no matter how logical it seemed to him, was deeply, fundamentally flawed. The tension in the room slowly began to dissipate. Emily took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. Even if I were to consider it, she said, her voice quieter now but still firm, what would the terms be? Would you use me as a front? While I'm trapped in this penthouse, unable to have my own voice? Robert finally relaxed his shoulders, appearing more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. I don't want to control you, Emily. I just don't know how else to handle my family's pressure. But you're strong and resilient. And even if it's not traditional, we can respect each other's boundaries. Emily looked at him, seeing something beyond the cold facade she had initially perceived. A flicker of vulnerability, perhaps even desperation. If I accept this proposal, she said, her voice steady, it will be on my terms. I won't allow you to humiliate me or treat me like your property. If you accept that, I promise to respect your conditions, and you'll have your freedom. We can build a partnership, maybe even a friendship. Robert offered a small, hesitant smile, revealing a vulnerability she hadn't noticed before. I accept your terms, Emily. We'll find a way to make this work, for both of us. Emily hesitated, the internal struggle evident in her eyes. Robert's words echoed in her heart. Security for Lucas. A chance to give him a life free from worry. The offer had its merits, but the risks, they were equally daunting. So, she began, her voice barely a whisper. Just then, the kitchen door swung open, revealing Claire, who had clearly been eavesdropping. Her expression was triumphant, a malicious smile twisting her lips. Oh, this is simply delightful, Claire purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. But I'm sure we can do so much better for Emily. Emily narrowed her eyes at Claire, sensing that her presence was far from innocent. Claire seized the opportunity, ready to twist the situation to her advantage. Do you really think a marriage like this will work? Claire continued, her gaze fixed on Robert. What if Emily has other intentions? Wouldn't it be risky to let someone like her get so close to you, Robert? Robert turned to Claire, visibly irritated. This is none of your business, Claire, he snapped, his voice sharp. I'm making my own decisions. Claire let out a sarcastic laugh. Decisions? Sure, but are you seeing the consequences? Emily might not be as trustworthy as she seems. Who knows what she really wants out of this arrangement? Emily, now both stunned and defensive, faced Claire with a newfound determination. Please don't drag me into your games, Claire, she said, her voice clear and strong. Robert and I are two adults having a conversation. I can certainly take care of my own interests. Claire crossed her arms, her smile cunning. We'll see, dear, but I wonder if you truly understand what you're getting yourself into. The tension was palpable as Claire finally swept out of the room, leaving a heavy, poisoned atmosphere behind. Emily looked at Robert, trying to process the chaotic turn the conversation had taken. Sorry, Robert said, breaking the silence. I didn't expect Claire to interfere like that. She's relentless, isn't she? She seems to manipulate everything and everyone, Emily replied, her resolve starting to solidify. That's for sure, but I know myself well enough. I won't be a puppet for her, or anyone else. If I agree to this marriage, it will be on my terms. Robert nodded slowly. I respect that, and you should know that I'm not someone who lets others control me either. I just wanted to quiet my family's criticism, but only if you're willing to go along with it. Emily thought carefully about her options. It was an unconventional proposal, a complicated situation, but the burning desire to create a better future for Lucas couldn't be ignored. Her heart warmed at the thought of how she could use this opportunity to change their lives. Yes, Robert, she said, her voice steady and sincere. I'll accept your proposal, but let me make one thing clear. You cannot treat me like a servant or humiliate me. I demand respect and the freedom to be myself, even if we're married. Robert's expression softened, a mix of relief and admiration in his eyes. I accept your terms, Emily. We'll find a way to make this work, for both of us. And so, with a deep breath, Emily made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential pitfalls, especially with Claire lurking in the shadows, ready to sabotage their fragile arrangement. Yet, with her unwavering resolve and the fierce determination to secure a better future for Lucas, Emily was ready to face whatever came her way. As the night deepened, a new dynamic began to take shape in the penthouse. Emily knew challenges lay ahead, especially with Claire determined to set traps and stir up trouble. Yet, with her unshakable resolve and the drive to secure a better future for Lucas, Emily was ready to face whatever came her way. The wedding day arrived, a small, understated ceremony held amidst the opulent grandeur of Robert's penthouse. The guests were few, mostly Robert's family and a handful of close associates. The atmosphere was a strange mix of apprehension and forced celebration. Emily wore a simple white dress she'd found at a vintage shop. It perfectly reflected her understated style, but her eyes shone with a quiet hope. Robert, on the other hand, appeared composed, almost detached, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of something deeper, something he wasn't yet ready to reveal. His calm facade masked a storm of emotions churning beneath the surface. The exchange of vows was brief, reserved. Each spoken word added another layer of uncertainty to Emily's heart. I, Robert, take you, Emily, to be my wife. His words echoed in the vast living room, but Emily felt as though the promise lingered only in the air, not in his heart. After the ceremony, as the small gathering dispersed, Emily looked into Robert's eyes, searching for something, anything. We can make this work, right? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, he replied, but the hesitation in his voice was unmistakable. In the days that followed, Emily and Robert began to navigate their new, unconventional life together. There were moments, fleeting and unexpected, when Robert's small gestures touched Emily deeply. He seemed genuinely thoughtful when he brought home a book of classic children's stories for Lucas, or when he tentatively suggested, "How about we spend a day in Central Park with Lucas on Saturday?" offering her a soft, almost shy smile. The warmth in his eyes made her heart flutter. I think it would be fun. Emily felt a warmth bloom in her chest, chasing away the ever-present chill of uncertainty. She smiled, moved by his unexpected kindness. That sounds wonderful, Robert. Lucas would love it. On the day of their park outing, the sun shone brightly, painting the city in golden light. Central Park was alive with laughter, the vibrant colors of spring bursting forth. Robert watched Lucas chase pigeons across the paved paths, his face lit with pure, unadulterated joy. Meanwhile, Emily turned to Robert, observing the unexpected serenity on his face. There was a peacefulness there, a quiet contentment she hadn't witnessed before, something that made her feel deeply connected to him, despite the invisible barriers that still separated them. Lucas really likes you, Emily said softly, her smile filled with a genuine affection that surprised even her. Robert looked at her, a hint of vulnerability softening his usually guarded eyes. You know, he said, his voice low, sincere, I've always dreamed of being a father, and Lucas, he's such a wonderful child. That's why you wanted this marriage, isn't it? Emily teased playfully, winking at him to lighten the mood. Because it came with a kid? Everything for your perfect family. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes, but his expression quickly grew more serious, more introspective. It wasn't just about Lucas, he admitted, his gaze meeting hers, holding it. It was about his mother. You intrigued me, Emily, and I needed a woman with your strength by my side. Robert's words caught Emily completely off guard. She felt a blush creep up her neck, her heart suddenly racing. The man before her was so much more than the aloof, cold millionaire she had initially imagined. He was vulnerable, sensitive, and above all human. The way he spoke about his feelings, however tentatively, made her realize there was a depth to Robert she had only just begun to glimpse. Still, even these moments of connection seemed to exist within invisible walls, barriers that Robert couldn't quite or wouldn't quite break down. He was kind, generous even, but his smiles were often followed by long, impenetrable silences. Deep down, Emily felt torn, caught between a fragile hope for a brighter future and the nagging fear of never truly reaching the intimacy, the connection she longed for. At the same time, Claire was working relentlessly, determined to sabotage any chance of happiness for Robert and Emily. She began subtly spreading rumors amongst the penthouse staff, insidious whispers insinuating that Emily was a gold digger only after Robert's wealth. "Have you seen how she acts?" Claire said, laughing with a group of maids in the laundry room, always smiling like she's actually enjoying this luxurious life. Little does she know, wealth can disappear overnight. Claire's poisonous words spread like wildfire, subtly shifting the atmosphere in the penthouse. A chilling undercurrent of suspicion began to taint the air. Some staff members, once polite, began avoiding Emily's gaze, casting judgmental glances her way. Emily noticed the subtle but unmistakable shift in atmosphere, feeling increasingly isolated, as if she was being slowly, deliberately pushed out. One morning, as Emily was in the kitchen preparing Lucas's breakfast, Claire entered, her eyes like chips of ice, fixed directly on her. "You know, dear," Claire began, her voice dripping with cynical sweetness, "Robert has always had a soft spot for damsels in distress. But the truth is, appearances can be deceiving. He doesn't trust you, Emily." Emily felt her blood boil, a slow, simmering anger rising within her. "Robert is my husband, Claire," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm not a damsel in distress. I'm a mother, trying to give her son the best life possible." Claire just laughed, a short, sharp, unpleasant sound, clearly relishing Emily's anger. "Oh, but don't forget, dear, he might not see you that way for long. A real man wants someone who can give him a legacy, and you're not that woman." Claire's words were like shards of glass, cutting deep, piercing Emily's fragile sense of security, leaving wounds that festered. She tried to remain strong, to dismiss Claire's venom as the bitter ramblings of a jealous woman, but a whirlwind of insecurities began to swirl within her. Could it be true? Did Robert, deep down, still harbor doubts about her motives? Did he truly trust her? Countless questions echoed in her mind, and a seed of doubt, planted by Claire's insidious words, began to take root in her heart. In a moment of despair, Emily retreated to the penthouse's small terrace garden, seeking solace amongst the blooming flowers. As she gazed at the vibrant colors, a small figure ran happily towards her, Lucas. He held out a drawing, a childish masterpiece of crayon strokes and bright colors, bringing a sliver of light back into her shadowed world. But even as she smiled at her son, Claire's words echoed in her mind, a constant, nagging reminder of her vulnerability. "Hi, Mom," Lucas called, his face beaming, holding out the drawing. "Look, I made this for you." It was a colorful picture of a smiling sun, a stick-figure family, and a bright blue sky. For a fleeting moment, Emily smiled genuinely, the warmth of her son's love a temporary balm against the sting of Claire's cruelty. "It's beautiful, Lucas," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his soft hair, feeling comforted, momentarily grounded. But the memory of Claire's poisonous remarks continued to torment her. Later that evening, when Robert entered the living room, Emily hesitated to share her worries, her anxieties. She longed to open up to him, to confide in him, but she feared he might see her as the manipulative gold digger Claire had so effectively painted her to be. The silence between them grew, stretching, becoming a heavy, suffocating burden. Emily decided for now it was safer to ignore her concerns, to bury them deep within. "Hi, Robert," she said, forcing a light, cheerful tone. "Lucas made a drawing for me today." Robert looked at Lucas, his face softening at the sight of the artwork. Amazing, Lucas, he exclaimed, genuinely impressed. I love this. A smiling sun. You're a talented artist. He even crouched down to kiss Lucas's forehead, a small, spontaneous gesture of affection that warmed Emily's heart. The look Robert gave Emily at that moment, across Lucas's head, carried something genuine, something that made her believe, against the rising tide of doubt, that there was still hope for them, for their fragile, unconventional family. But as dinner was served, Claire appeared again, like an unwelcome shadow, refusing to fade into the background. "Oh, Robert," she began, her voice honeyed, yet laced with venom. "Don't you see more than just a drawing? Your wife might not be as interested in you as she is in your wealth, and she's using little Lucas to soften you up." The mood at the dinner table changed instantly, freezing the fragile warmth that had begun to bloom. Robert, who had been about to make a loving remark about the meal, froze, his gaze dropping to his plate, his face hardening. Emily's heart sank. He seemed to be swayed even now by Claire's insidious whispers. Fear, cold and clammy, consumed her. "Claire," Robert said, his voice suddenly cold, firm, a warning, "don't start with your insinuations. Emily is my wife, and she deserves respect, just like anyone else in this penthouse." Emily looked into Robert's eyes, desperately searching for confirmation, for reassurance that he truly supported her, that he wouldn't let Claire's poison seep into their fragile bond. She wanted to believe he was protecting her, defending her, but Claire's words, like persistent thorns, still lingered in her mind, pricking at her confidence, her hope. Later, retreated to their bedroom, Emily could no longer hold back the tears. She walked to the window, gazing out at the city lights, the stars twinkling in the inky sky. She wondered with a heavy heart where they had gone wrong, where they had built walls instead of bridges. Robert appeared in the doorway, his expression etched with concern. "Emily," he asked softly, his voice laced with worry. "What's going on? You seem distant, and I don't understand why." She turned, tears streaming down her face, blurring her vision. "Claire is right, Robert," she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. It feels like I'm only here for what you have, and it hurts me. I don't want to be seen as a gold digger or someone taking advantage of you." Enveloped by her raw vulnerability, Robert stepped closer, his own carefully constructed defenses crumbling. "Emily," he murmured, reaching out to cup her face in his hands, "you mean so much more to me than that. Don't believe anything Claire says." He hesitated, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm trying to understand you, this life we're building together, but I'll admit, I'm struggling to open up." He hesitated again, bringing his hands to his face, running them through his hair. Emily could see the inner battle raging within him, reflected in the torment in his eyes. I need you, Emily, but I'm afraid of letting myself be vulnerable." "The truth is," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm not as strong as I seem." Robert's raw honesty touched Emily deeply, piercing through the layers of hurt and doubt. She realized, with a jolt of understanding, that their walls, though different in their construction, were remarkably similar in their purpose: protection, fear of exposure, vulnerability. "We need each other, Robert," she said, her voice softening, her tears slowing. "We can create something beautiful together, but it takes trust, and I can't do this alone." Robert looked at her for a long moment, his gaze searching, intense, and then Emily saw something flicker in his eyes, a spark of hope, a silent promise that they would both, finally, truly try. I'll be honest with you, Emily," he said, his voice regaining strength, resolve. "As much as I can. Let's work on this together." The room grew still, the city sounds fading into a distant hum, and in that quiet space, the walls that had seemed so unbreakable, so insurmountable, began, ever so subtly, to crack. Emily felt a fragile hope bloom in her chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, their connection could grow, could deepen, despite Claire's relentless manipulations, despite the shadows of their past. But she knew she had to remain vigilant. Claire wouldn't give up easily. Even as new challenges loomed on the horizon, Emily felt a flicker of strength, a nascent belief that they could face them, together. There was so much more to Robert than his cold, guarded exterior, and that realization, that fragile understanding, was the first step towards a future she dared to hope they could build, one uncertain day at a time. Life at Robert's penthouse began to settle into a new rhythm, a fragile dance of tentative connection and lingering doubt. The relationship between Robert and Emily slowly, painstakingly, began to mend, to rebuild, despite the persistent undercurrent of tension and Claire's constant, spiteful remarks. Emily did her best to ignore Claire's disdain, to rise above the subtle insults and the pointed silences. But the poisoned atmosphere in the penthouse was becoming increasingly unbearable. One morning, while pouring coffee in the kitchen, Emily overheard a hushed conversation between two staff members. "Did you hear? Robert's new wife is pregnant," one whispered, her voice laced with scandal. "It's definitely not his," the other replied, followed by a snicker of malicious laughter. Emily's heart plummeted. Who would spread such cruel, baseless lies about her? It had to be Claire. Of course it was Claire. Determined to confront the insidious rumors head-on, Emily went to find Robert. She found him in his office, reviewing documents, his brow furrowed with concentration. "Robert," she said, her voice trembling slightly, trying to mask the rising tide of anxiety. "We need to talk." He looked up, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. "About what?" he asked, the familiar tension between them tightening like a taut wire, threatening to snap. "I'm hearing rumors, Robert," she said, her voice rising slightly, indignation warring with fear. "Claire is saying, I'm pregnant by another man." The words hung in the air, sharp, accusatory. "That's not true," Emily insisted, her voice clear, ringing with the force of her truth. "I would never do such a thing." Robert froze, his expression shifting from initial surprise to a cold, unsettling confusion. Is that all you have to say?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I can't believe you're letting that woman's lies dictate this conversation, Robert," Emily pleaded, her voice rising with desperation. "Robert, please," she begged, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm not joking. This is just another cruel lie she's using to drive us apart." "What do you expect me to do about it, Emily?" Robert retorted, his voice laced with frustration, disbelief. "The penthouse is buzzing with whispers about you, about us. I don't know who to believe anymore. I can't just ignore what everyone is saying." Over the past few days, the insidious rumors surrounding Emily had consumed his thoughts, poisoning his fragile trust. Who should he believe? His mind, once sharp and clear, was now clouded with doubt, with suspicion, making it almost impossible to see the truth that stood directly before him. "Do you honestly think I could do something like that, Robert?" Emily asked, her voice cracking with pain. "I'm not the person Claire is trying to make me out to be." Tears streamed down her face, unchecked as the situation spiraled, becoming more unbearable by the moment. "We can overcome this, Robert," she pleaded, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Together, I'm learning to care about you, and I want us to build our lives on a solid foundation. But I need you to stand by my side." Robert ran a hand through his hair, his emotions warring within him, playing out in the turmoil in his eyes. "Fine, Emily," he conceded, his voice strained, grudging. I'll give you a chance, but my heart is full of insecurities. I've been alone for so long, and, well, I don't want to get hurt again." "If you're willing to listen, Robert," Emily said desperately, her voice trembling, hope flickering in her eyes, I can show you the truth." The tension in the room thickened, stretched to its breaking point. And then Robert began to speak, his voice barely audible, a confession wrenched from the depths of his soul. I'm sterile, Emily," he whispered, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. I can't have children." His confession landed like a physical blow, the pain in his face unmistakable, raw, exposed. "So," he continued, his voice flat, hollow, "if you're pregnant, it can't be mine." Emily froze, his words echoing in her mind, a devastating revelation that shattered the fragile hope she had been clinging to. The shock of his confession momentarily paralyzed her, but soon the shock morphed into a burning, white-hot anger. "Robert," she said, her voice rising, trembling with fury, "I would never play with your feelings like that. You have to believe me. Claire is lying. I'm your wife, and I promise to stand by you." Robert's eyes turned glacial, his face closing off, hardening with an expression of cold, impenetrable distrust. "How can I know that, Emily?" he asked, his voice devoid of warmth, devoid of love. "How can I know you don't have other feelings? My past has taught me to be cautious." At that moment, Emily's carefully constructed facade of strength crumbled. Her vulnerability became stark, exposed, her heart visibly wounded. "I'm here to build a family with you, Robert," she whispered, her voice breaking, "not to destroy what we have. Whatever you feel about your past cannot involve me." Before Robert could reply, a long, heavy silence descended between them, a chasm of mistrust and misunderstanding yawning between them. The suffocating tension was palpable, crushing. And eventually, Emily felt a profound sense of defeat, a crushing realization that there was no way out, no bridge across the chasm that now separated them. The man she had dared to love, the man she had hoped to build a life with, seemed to be drifting further and further away, lost in a fog of doubt and suspicion. It was as if the deepest threads of their fragile connection were unraveling, fraying, lost in the poisonous whispers of Claire's manipulations. Lost in her swirling thoughts, Emily felt a suffocating pressure mounting in her chest. "Robert," she said, her voice barely a whisper, choked with unshed tears. I can't stay here, not like this. I need space to breathe. I need to protect my son and myself." She stood, her body trembling, her voice resonating with a quiet, devastating resolve. "You're going to leave me?" Robert asked, his voice rising, laced with disbelief, pain. "After everything, what will you do? You can't just walk away." But his words no longer resonated with her wounded heart. "Yes, Robert," she confirmed, her voice trembling, tears streaming down her face. "I'm leaving, and I'm taking Lucas with me." She saw a flicker of shock, then pain in his eyes. "And," she added, her voice hardening with a newfound resolve, "I swear, I'll never come back. I can't stay in a place where I'm not believed. I can't stay in a place where, above all, you don't trust me." Robert's eyes were filled with a swirling vortex of pain and confusion. But Emily no longer believed in him, in his capacity to trust, to love unconditionally. She saw, with heartbreaking clarity, how Claire's insidious manipulations had destroyed everything she had dared to dream of. Most importantly, she wouldn't remain in a place where love was so easily, so readily replaced by mistrust, by suspicion, by doubt. "Emily," Robert began, his voice laced with desperation, his name a raw cry, etched with a sudden, agonizing fear, but the words wouldn't come. He recognized, with a sickening lurch of his heart, the devastating truth in her words. Yet, the ingrained doubts, the deep-seated insecurities consumed him, paralyzed him, making it utterly impossible for him to truly open up, to bridge the chasm that now separated them. I can't do this alone, Robert," Emily said, her voice soft but final, devoid of any lingering hope. "I can't fight the lack of trust, Claire's rumors, while you accuse me and refuse to believe in me," Emily responded, trying desperately to hold back the sobs that threatened to overwhelm her. But frustration, exhaustion, and a profound sense of loss finally broke through her carefully constructed dam of control. She grabbed Lucas's small backpack, which she had packed earlier, in a moment of premonition, with some clothes, essentials, while he played innocently in the garden, oblivious to the shattering of his world. I'll gather our things," she said, her voice barely audible, "and we'll leave. I just want a place where we can start over." "Do you really think you can just leave?" Robert asked, his voice low, shaky, raw with pain, "without even trying to fix this?" There was a desperate hint of fear in his voice, in the way he stepped closer, reaching out tentatively to take her arm, but Emily pulled away, recoiling from his touch as if burned. "I tried, Robert," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "I showed you my loyalty, my love, but all you see is Claire lurking in the shadows. I might be a chapter in your life, Robert, but I can't be a burden." Her words hit him like daggers, sharp, precise, lethal. Without another word, Emily took Lucas's small hand in hers, and together, mother and son, they walked towards the penthouse door, leaving behind a shattered dream, a broken promise, a love that had withered before it had a chance to truly bloom. A mix of raw determination and profound sadness surrounded them as Robert stood, frozen, paralyzed by silent shock, watching them walk away, watching his world crumble before his eyes. "If you walk out that door, Emily," he began, his voice cracking, desperate, I don't know if there will be another chance. I don't know if you'll ever find someone who loves you like I do. Robert's words hung in the air, heavy with regret, with a desperate, belated realization of what he was about to lose. But Emily turned, facing him one last time, her eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored his own. "Love isn't just about saying the words, Robert," she said, her voice quiet, but resonating with a profound, heartbreaking truth. "It's about trust and support. And you're not giving me that. Claire may think this is a game, but my life isn't a game, and Lucas deserves better." She paused, her gaze locking with his for a final, agonizing moment. "Goodbye, Robert," she whispered, her voice breaking, her heart shattering as she turned away, leaving behind all that could have been, all that might have been. Freedom lay ahead, an unknown, uncertain landscape stretching before her, but the pain of leaving Robert, of abandoning the fragile promise of their unconventional family, would follow her every step, a constant ache in her soul. Emily vowed to herself, as she walked away from the opulent prison of Robert's penthouse, that she would never return, that she would never again allow manipulation, distrust, and insidious lies to harm her, to break her spirit. Above all, she promised herself, and to Lucas, that she would ensure he had a bright future, a life far removed from the shadows of the past she was leaving behind. With tears blurring her vision, she walked towards the unknown future, ready, finally, to rewrite her story, no matter what tomorrow might bring. Meanwhile, Robert sank into the plush leather chair in his office, surrounded by the cold, sterile silence of his penthouse, by piles of documents that now seemed meaningless, insignificant. Emily's departure had left him in a state of profound confusion, of agonizing regret. He couldn't stop replaying her words in his mind, each syllable echoing in the vast emptiness of the room, each syllable a sharp accusatory stab at his heart. And with each passing minute, his doubts about Emily, about Claire, about himself, began to shift, to dissolve, replaced by a dawning, terrifying realization. Claire had played him. Claire had made a fool of him, feeding on insecurities he hadn't even realized he harbored, exploiting his deepest fears, twisting the truth until he could no longer recognize it. "How could I have been so blind?" Robert murmured to himself, his voice raw with self-recrimination, slamming his fist on the polished mahogany desk. How could I have believed her? The rumors, the doubts, Claire's insidious whispers, all of it seemed so distant now, so unreal, as vivid, heartbreaking memories of the good moments with Emily surfaced, flooding his mind, drowning him in a sea of regret. The smiles they had shared, the quiet moments of connection, the way Lucas's face lit up in his presence, the small, tentative gestures of affection, of burgeoning love. That was love, not the twisted, manipulative game Claire had orchestrated. Robert's mind began to race, frantic, desperate. He remembered now with sickening clarity how Claire used to speak of Emily, the subtle digs, the veiled insults, the constant insinuations she would casually drop during their conversations, almost as if she were deliberately planting seeds of distrust, nurturing them, watching them take root in his vulnerable heart. Claire had always been manipulative, he knew that, had always been possessive, subtly controlling, but he had never imagined the depths of her calculated cruelty, the extent of her ruthless ambition. He stood abruptly, propelled by a sudden, urgent need for action. He had to confront Claire. He had to finally, definitively sever the poisonous tendrils of her influence from his life. He walked quickly, purposefully down the hallway towards Claire's office, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and a dawning, terrifying clarity. Robert found her in her office, meticulously sorting through some papers, a look of detached indifference on her face. As he entered, she looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "We need to talk, Claire," he said, his voice firm, resolute, leaving no room for argument. She looked up, feigning indifference as if entirely unbothered by the storm that was about to break. "If you're thinking of bringing up Emily again," she said, her voice cool, dismissive, "I'm sorry, Robert, but the truth is, she doesn't deserve your trust." "That's exactly what I want to discuss, Claire," Robert insisted, stepping closer, his gaze unwavering, intense. "It's time for you to be honest with me, about everything. What you've done is nothing short of betrayal." Claire raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a cynical smile curling her lips. "Betrayal?" she scoffed, her voice dripping with false indignation. "I'm the traitor, not me, Robert. You should have been more careful, more discerning." "No, Claire," he said, shaking his head, his voice resolute, unwavering. "I see it now. You were the one spreading lies about her. You're the one who started those rumors, weren't you? You were trying to convince me that Emily wasn't worth it, that she was only after my money. Claire's carefully constructed smile faltered, cracked, and a flicker of raw nervousness, of fear, crossed her eyes, betraying her carefully crafted facade of indifference. "You can't seriously believe I would do that, Robert," she protested, her voice rising slightly, a tremor of panic creeping in. "All I've ever done is protect you, like I always have." "Protect me or control me?" Robert countered, his voice sharp, accusatory. "You've always wanted to stay in my life, Claire, in control of my life. I tried to distance myself, to create some space, but you drove the wedge deeper, with your lies, your manipulations. You pretended to be on my side, but you were the one leading me into a pit of distrust, of suspicion." Robert snapped, his voice rising with anger, with a dawning, terrifying understanding of the extent of her betrayal. "Tell me why, Claire. Why did you do it? What is it about Emily that threatens you so much?" Claire sighed, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking, her frustration, her raw, unmasked jealousy beginning to surface. "Because I was never enough for you, Robert," she spat, her voice laced with bitterness, with resentment. "I always saw you, longing for what she had, a real life, a family. I just wanted what should have been mine." Robert felt a chill run down his spine, a cold wave of revulsion washing over him. "But your desire," he said, his voice low, dangerous, "doesn't justify your lies, Claire. You made me push her away. And now, because of you, my family is falling apart." "Family?" Claire scoffed, her voice dripping with scorn. "You've let her fool you, Robert. Do you honestly think a woman like her could ever love you? You're a valuable man, Robert. And she just wanted a comfortable life, a free ride." Claire shouted, her voice rising in a crescendo of anger, of bitter, unrequited longing. "Enough, Claire," Robert said, his anger finally transforming into a cold, steely determination. "Malia's gone. And I see now, with terrifying clarity, that you were the one who poisoned everything between us, with your lies, your manipulations. I can't trust you anymore, Claire. Not anymore." He paused, his gaze hardening, his voice leaving no room for argument, for appeal. "Consider yourself dismissed." Claire's expression shifted instantly, morphing into one of pure, unadulterated fury, of disbelief. You can't do this to me, Robert," she shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "I've always been there for you, always. And if Emily doesn't come back, Robert, if Emily doesn't return, it's because of you. You destroyed that chance." "Leave, Claire," Robert said, his voice cold, final, unwavering. "I never want to hear your name again." He turned away, dismissing her, feeling a heavy weight lift from his shoulders as the words left his mouth, severing the poisonous connection that had bound them for so long. With Claire storming out of the office, defeated, enraged, Robert took a deep, shuddering breath and made a decision. He had to find Emily. He wasn't sure how, he wasn't sure where she had gone, but he had to find her. He had to make things right. Memories of the past, of his ingrained insecurities, of his crippling fear of vulnerability still haunted him, but his newfound clarity, his burning need to atone for his mistakes, was stronger now, more powerful than ever before. He knew he had to show Emily, somehow, that his love for her, for their fragile, unconventional family, was real. As he left the penthouse, walking purposefully towards the garage and his waiting car, something caught his attention. A small, folded piece of paper was tucked under the windshield wiper of his car. He grabbed it, his heart quickening with a sudden, inexplicable sense of foreboding. He unfolded it, his expression shifting, morphing through a rapid succession of emotions as he read the childish scrawl, the innocent, heartbreaking words. It was a note. Lucas's note, written to Emily, no doubt. But one detail, one heartbreaking detail, stood out, leaping off the page, searing itself into his consciousness. "Mommy, I love you, and I'm so happy with our new family. And Daddy Ben." Robert's heart stopped, just for a moment, the world tilting on its axis. Daddy Ben. The words echoed in his mind, resonating with a force that replaced his initial panic with a dawning, overwhelming understanding. Lucas considered him his father, Daddy Ben. What did this mean? The devastating truth about his sterility, the crushing weight of his perceived inability to be a father, suddenly collided with the innocent, unconditional love of a small boy, with the profound, life-altering realization that fatherhood wasn't, and never had been, about biology. It was about love, about connection, about family. And in that moment, Everything he thought he knew about Emily, about their relationship, about himself, shifted, reformed, crystallized into a single, burning, undeniable truth. He had to find her. He had to find Emily. If the innocent words in Lucas's note were true, if there was still a chance, however slim, however fragile, to rebuild what he had so carelessly, so foolishly destroyed, then he had to seize it. Now. The only way to reconnect with her, to understand the full, devastating truth of what he had almost lost, was to seek her out. Immediately. The New York sun was shining brightly, casting long shadows across the city streets. But Robert's heart felt heavy, leaden with regret, with a desperate, gnawing hope. He needed to find Emily and tell her everything. Tell her how much he had changed. Tell her that he finally understood. But he wasn't even sure where she had gone. Driven by a desperate urgency, Robert grabbed his phone, his fingers fumbling slightly as he quickly reached out to some friends, to acquaintances, to anyone who might have a clue, a lead, a whisper of information about where Emily might have gone. The hours crawled by, agonizingly slow, each minute stretching into an eternity of anxious waiting, of gnawing uncertainty. The sun was beginning to set, painting the New York skyline in hues of orange and gold, when he finally got a lead. A small town nestled in the Hudson Valley, just a few hours north of the city, a town called Beacon. After a frantic, adrenaline-fueled drive, Robert found himself in a modest, charming neighborhood, the air crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine trees and wood smoke. Small shops lined the main street, their windows glowing warmly in the twilight. As he walked past a small clothing boutique, his eyes caught a familiar figure behind the counter, folding t-shirts with practiced ease. It was Emily. His heart leaped, a surge of hope, of relief flooding through him, chasing away the gnawing fear that had been his constant companion for days. "Emily!" he called out, his voice raw with emotion, with a desperate, fragile hope lighting up his face. She looked up, startled, her eyes widening, then narrowing, a complex mixture of surprise, distrust, and something else, something softer, something he dared to hope might be relief in their depths. "Robert?" she asked, her voice sharp, guarded, but beneath the defensive edge he could sense the sadness, the lingering pain. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you, Emily," he said, his voice low, nervous, adjusting his tie, his posture, suddenly acutely aware of his disheveled appearance, of the miles he had driven, of the desperation that had driven him here. "We need to talk," he pleaded, his eyes searching hers, begging for a chance, a moment to explain. "About us," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "About what happened. I'm so sorry, Emily." Emily crossed her arms, her expression closed off, wary. "You think you can just show up out of nowhere, Robert?" she said, her voice tight with emotion. "And everything will be fine? You hurt me, Robert, deeply. I don't know if I can just forgive you." "I know I hurt you, Emily," Robert said, his voice earnest, sincere, "but I've learned from my mistakes. Claire, she was manipulating everything, and I let her words affect me. I let you go, without fighting for you," Robert explained, pouring his heart out, sincerity ringing in every word. "And what am I supposed to do with that, Robert?" Emily shot back, her voice laced with bitterness, her eyes flashing with a mixture of pain and defiance. She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "Do you really think a simple apology is enough to convince me?" He took a deep breath, steeling himself, his determination hardening, solidifying. "Not just an apology, Emily," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "I want to build a new life with you, with our child." He paused, his voice catching slightly, the enormity of what he was saying, of what he was hoping for, suddenly hitting him with full force. "I know I made terrible mistakes, but I'm willing to change, Emily, to be better. For you, for Lucas, for our family." She hesitated, her expression softening slightly, a flicker of curiosity, of something akin to hope, shining through the layers of pain and distrust in her eyes. "Our child?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper, a hesitant, fragile question. A hint of curiosity, of tentative hope began to bloom within her, but the deep-seated doubt, the lingering fear, still lingered, casting a long shadow over the fragile spark of possibility. "What do you mean by that, Robert?" "I found Lucas's note, Emily," Robert began, his voice softening, gentling. He But Emily cut him off, interrupting him, her eyes widening, her expression suddenly urgent, intense. "Robert," she said, her voice low, serious, her gaze locking with his, holding it. "There's something you need to know." She paused, taking a deep breath, bracing herself, bracing him for what she was about to reveal. I'm pregnant with twins, Robert." Her words hung in the air, heavy, charged, electrifying. I went through an experimental procedure to have a chance at building the family we always dreamed of." Emily's words hit Robert like a physical blow, knocking the breath from his lungs, shattering his carefully constructed defenses, leaving him reeling. Pregnant with twins, an experimental procedure. He was in shock, his mind racing, his thoughts tumbling over each other, her words echoing in his ears, rearranging everything he thought he knew, everything he thought was possible. "Pregnant with twins?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper, his gaze fixed on her, searching for confirmation, for understanding. "An experimental procedure?" He was completely, utterly stunned. "Why didn't you tell me before, Emily?" he asked, finally finding his voice, a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and a burgeoning sense of awe in his tone. "Because," Emily replied, her voice trembling, her gaze dropping, shame and vulnerability warring in her eyes. "Because I wasn't sure it would work. And I was already so hurt by you, Robert. So broken. I wanted you by my side, Robert. I wanted to share this with you. But I didn't know if that was even possible, especially after everything that happened." Emily's voice broke, tears welling in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks, the raw vulnerability of her confession cutting into Robert's heart, deeper than any accusation, any recrimination. Robert felt a tidal wave of emotion wash over him, love, admiration, guilt, and a profound, overwhelming sense of gratitude. For Emily, for her courage, for her unwavering hope, for her willingness to take such a risk, for him, for them, for their future. You did this for us, Emily?" he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, his gaze softening, gentling, his heart overflowing with a love he had never known he was capable of feeling. That's incredible," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You took a risk, Emily, a huge risk, to give us a chance." "I did it because I believed we could face whatever came our way, together," Emily said, her voice barely audible, her gaze meeting his, holding it, unwavering, despite the tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to give them a chance, Robert, to have a father, a home, a family. But now," she continued, her voice faltering, breaking, "after everything that's happened, I'm not sure if you truly want this anymore, Robert." Her voice was fragile, raw, heartbreaking. "I'm not sure if you truly want me." Emily's words cut into Robert's heart, a sharp, agonizing realization of the depth of the pain he had inflicted, the extent of the damage he had caused. "Emily," Robert said, his voice urgent, pleading, his hand reaching out to cup her face, his touch gentle, tender. "I want to be with you, Emily. I want to be your husband. I want to be the father to Lucas, and to our children, to our twins," he declared, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction, a desperate urgency growing within him. "What I did, Emily," he continued, his voice cracking with remorse, "was terrible. I should have believed in you from the start. I should have trusted you." Emily looked at him, her tears still flowing, unchecked, her heart torn between the raw pain of the past and the fragile hope for a future she dared to dream of. "And what if you leave again, Robert?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her insecurities laid bare. "What if you doubt me again? What will happen to our family then?" "I promise you, Emily," Robert said, his voice low, fervent, his gaze locking with hers, unwavering, intense. "I won't. I'll fight for us, Emily. I'll fight for our family. I want to be a good husband, Emily, and a present, loving father. Give me another chance, Emily. Please, just one more chance to prove to you that I can be everything you need." He knelt before her, his posture pleading, his gaze sincere, vulnerable, raw. "Please, Emily, let me back into your life. I want to build a future with you and with our children." She studied him, her gaze searching, probing, a complex mixture of pain, hope, and lingering doubt swirling in her eyes. "Robert," she began, her voice barely a whisper, hesitant, unsure. But he interrupted her, his voice urgent, pleading, desperate. "Please, Emily," he begged, his voice cracking. "Don't say anything now. Just give me a chance. Let's talk, Emily. Let's plan. Let's figure out how we can make this work. Together." He pleaded, the sincerity in his eyes palpable, undeniable. Emily leaned in, her gaze searching his, probing deep, seeking honesty, seeking truth. And in the depths of his eyes, she saw not only regret, not only remorse, but a true willingness to change, a genuine desire to rebuild, to create something meaningful, something lasting. "If I say yes, Robert," she said, her voice soft but steady, "we'll have to face a lot of challenges. This pregnancy, it won't be easy, and I can't go through it all alone. Again," she murmured, her vulnerability shining through, raw, exposed, but also somehow resolute. "And I won't let you face anything alone, Emily," Robert assured her, his voice firm, unwavering. "We'll do this together. This is about us now, Emily. About our family. I want to be by your side, not just as a father, but as your partner. In everything," Robert said, his voice resonating with a newfound strength, a quiet determination. Emily's expression softened, ever so slightly as his words reached her heart, thawing the ice that had encased it for so long. He could see it now, a subtle shift, a hesitant opening. Maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to let her heart heal, to let hope creep back in. "You can't promise everything will be perfect, Robert," she said, her voice still fragile, but a note of hope, however faint, beginning to creep into her tone. "Life doesn't work that way." "I'm not promising perfection, Emily," he said, his voice low, earnest, his gaze unwavering. "But I promise to do my best, to be the man you and the twins deserve. I want to build something real, Emily, and lasting, with you," he said firmly, his voice ringing with conviction. In her heart, Emily felt a fragile hope rekindle, a tiny spark of possibility flickering to life amidst the ashes of her broken dreams. She looked at Robert, kneeling before her, vulnerable, exposed, his heart laid bare. And she knew, with a certainty that surprised even her, that the decision wouldn't be easy. There was a long, arduous road ahead. But the love he had for her, the love he had already begun to show for Lucas, the love he so desperately wanted to give to their unborn children, was starting to break through the barriers she had so carefully, so painstakingly built to protect herself. "All right, Robert," she said, her voice barely a whisper, hesitant, but finally, definitively yielding. Let's try this again. Together. But we need to be honest with each other, Robert. From now on, completely honest. About everything." "Deal," Robert replied, a genuine smile, the first truly joyful smile she had seen on his face in weeks, forming on his lips, the heavy weight of guilt and regret visibly lifting from his shoulders. He stood up slowly, carefully, his gaze locking with hers, holding it, promising everything without words. And then he pulled Emily into a long, heartfelt kiss, a kiss that spoke of forgiveness, of hope, of a new beginning. In that moment, standing in the doorway of the small-town boutique, a fragile hope for a fresh start began to bloom between them, a tender, resilient flower pushing through the cracks in the broken pavement of their past. They both knew the challenges were far from over, that the road ahead would be long and arduous and uncertain. But together, hand in hand, heart to heart, they were finally, truly ready to face anything.